At the beginning of the story, Somali pirates were kidnapping several people hostage. The pirates are well armed, so no one dares to attack their base. It is known that they have been holding the victims hostage for 3 months. Because it had been too long, the pirate leader demanded a ransom, and if it was not met, he would kill all the hostages. But just as they want to kill a hostage, a group of mercenaries suddenly took aim at them. This group is called the Expendables, and they are the most elite mercenaries. What's more, they consist of 6 people who are very brutal. Among them are a leader Barney Ross, Lee Christmas the knife expert, Yin Yang the martial arts expert, and Hail Caesar the military veteran who is a weapons expert. Then there is also a shooting expert named Gunnar Jansen, and Toll Road who is a former wrestling athlete. Here Barney tried to talk nicely to the pirates, because he wanted his hostages to be safe. Suddenly, Gunnar shot one of the pirates, causing a firefight. After the firefight subsided, Barney again persuaded the pirates to release all the hostages, especially now that they have been cornered by the Expendables. Barney and the others immediately reflexively slaughtered the pirates without hurting any hostages. After slaughtering them, Barney saw Gunnar hanging one of the pirates. According to Gunnar, he wanted to teach them a lesson, but Barney didn't like the way he did it. Meanwhile, Yin Yang immediately beat Gunnar without further ado. Here Gunnar managed to corner Yin Yang and almost killed him. Luckily, Barney immediately separated them. As a leader, he also said that Gunnar deserved to be beaten, because all this time he often stubborn and acted alone. Then the Expendables went home by plane. During the trip, Barney deliberately tied Gunnar's hands so that he wouldn't act up again. But on the other hand, Lee looked sorry and finally untied Gunnar, because even though he was unruly, he was his teammate. When he arrived in America, Lee then visited his girlfriend's house. But unfortunately at the house, there was a man who turned out to be her affair. Lacey then apologized because her actions were wrong. She did it because Lee rarely saw and met her. And after all, Lacey still needs an outlet for her desires. On the other hand, Lee was also at fault. He never even told her his job honestly, even though he had beside Lacey for over a year. As a result, their relationship broke up at that very night. Elsewhere, Barney is visited by his old friend Tool. He is one of the Expendables' advisors, as well as the person who helps Barney in recruiting new members. In addition, Tool also works as a pretty good tattoo artist, and while Tool was there, Barney asked for a new tattoo. While being tattooed, Barney said that he wanted to fire Gunnar because he was too difficult to manage. Not long after, Lee entered Barney's headquarters with a gloomy face. They both try to cheer him up, but it looks like Lee wants to be alone for a while. Then the scene moves to the island of Valena, which is known as a small country but has abundant resources. But the island is ruled by a dictator named General Garza. One night, General Garza's troops dragged 3 citizens who were considered stealing his stuff. As a result, the residents want to be put to death. But suddenly, it turned out that the one who shot one of the citizens was General Garza's business partner. He was a ruthless American mobster who had been involved in the drug trade for several years. He and General Garza have made Valena Island a fertile ground for their business. The man, better known as James Monroe, then asked General Garza to kill the 2 remaining residents so that he would be more feared, respected, and honored. The next day, Barney met someone in the church, but the person didn't want to tell his name, and he wanted to be called Mr. Church. In this place, Mr. Church wanted to hire mercenaries to finish off General Garza. But it turned out that Mr. Church also invited another mercenary. The soldier was named Trench Mauser, who was an old friend of Barney. After Mr. Church explained the mission, Trench just didn't want to interfere because he knew how many troops General Garza had. If he takes this mission, then it's the same as looking dead. Therefore, Trench stepped back and allowed Barney to take this job. At first, Barney was also a little hesitant about Mr. Church and the mission, but he finally agreed to cooperate as long as Mr. Church paid his team $5 million. Without thinking, Mr. Church immediately agreed. However, if Barney fails to carry out the mission or disobeys, then he will not hesitate to kill Barney and all his team. After receiving the mission, Barney immediately returned to the headquarters to prepare his team. But Gunnar suddenly arrived, even though he had been expelled by Barney. Gunnar did not accept because he could still help the team. Unfortunately, Barney remained firm in his stance to fire him. Moreover, Barney knew that Gunnar had been a drug addict, so he was often unfocused at work. Nothing to do, he had to leave there. Gunnar then told Barney to be careful, because he would definitely retaliate. Barney didn't want to bother, he preferred to focus on his mission. Without lingering, he immediately gathered the team to discuss his mission. But here Yin Yang asked for a raise payment because his son had to move to a better school. However, Barney could not guarantee this. But certainly, the pay this time was much greater than usual. To start the mission, Barney and Lee planned to go to Valena and meet with an informant who was working with Mr. Church. In addition, the two of them would also observe the situation on the island. Arriving in Valena, Barney and Lee then reported to the immigration office disguised as exotic bird watchers. From the looks of it, the immigration officer was suspicious of them, especially because they looked nervous. But in the end, they were allowed to enter the country. Barney and Lee then observed the surrounding situation, which was originally peaceful, suddenly became chaotic because General Garza's troops looted merchandise belonging to residents. But strangely, the one controlling the troops was James. Apparently, the mobster was very close to General Garza, so he could use his troops whenever he wanted. After a while, they finally met Mr. Church's informant. She was an orphan named Sandra. She was also one of the Valena citizens who strongly opposed General Garza and James. Sandra said that this place used to be a beautiful island, but since James' arrival, everything has been destroyed. Moreover, General Garza is too compliant with the ruthless mafia. Elsewhere, James is angry because his drug field is still empty. He also told General Garza to force his people to do hard labor here. General Garza initially did not like James, who acted a bit arrogant, but James said that he had the right to behave like that. Moreover, he was the one who had made General Garza be a rich man. At the same time, Sandra was driving Barney and Lee to near General Garza's palace. On the way, Lee chose to get out of the car, because he wanted to walk through the forest and find a good place to attack. Meanwhile, Sandra and Barney stop at an area near the palace bordered by an iron fence. Here, Barney is a little suspicious of Sandra, because she is too calm. Barney is just worried that he is being framed and trapped. And sure enough, General Garza's troops suddenly arrived. Then one of the soldiers said that Sandra was General Garza's only child, and she had to be taken to the palace immediately. Barney really wanted to help her, but he was ganged up on. Fortunately, Lee arrived on time and immediately took action with his knife. As a result, a fistfight ensued. After the brutality, Barney and Lee immediately left with Sandra. They are very sure, sooner or later, James will definitely catch up with his troops. But unfortunately, they were cornered. Barney decided to buy time so that Lee could take Sandra to his plane. But the woman refused and still wanted to be in Valena. After killing several immigration officers, Barney then jumped onto the plane while avoiding gunfire from James and General Garza's troops. Once on the plane, Barney suddenly changed his mind. He chose to make a U-turn and fought back instead of running away like a coward. While Barney was running the plane, Lee took the initiative to shoot the troops from the top of the plane. Thanks to their epic cooperation, the two of them managed to burn down the dock and dozens of troops. They also scared James and the others into plunging into the sea. Later that night, James blamed General Garza for the incident. According to him, all this happened because of Sandra, who is none other than General Garza's daughter. He also wanted to punish him. However, General Garza will not be willing if his daughter is hurt. Not long after, James suddenly had an uninvited guest, and it turns out that the guest in question is the gunner. He then invited James to cooperate in eliminating Barney and the others. But James must be willing to pay him a lot of money, otherwise Gunner will be brutalized on the spot. On the other hand, Barney and the others return to headquarters to hold a meeting with Yin Yang. Here, Barney finally finds out that James is a retired CIA officer and was once a colleague of Mr. Church. But now that James has a dark business and is very greedy, Mr. Church is driven to finish him off. On the other hand, the CIA is unlikely to agree with this operation. Therefore, Mr. Church intentionally hired the Expendables, and that was tantamount to sending Barney and the others to hell. Barney finally decided to cancel the mission because Mr. Church could not be trusted. The next day, Lee went back to visit Lacey, but when he got there, he saw a wound on Lacey's head area. It turned out that she was a victim of domestic violence from her new boyfriend. Lee, who felt unacceptable, finally went to the jerk and his friends. Lee then taught them a lesson by beating them all up. After seeing Lee's brutality, Lacey finally knows Lee's real job. Meanwhile, James is looking for Sandra in his hiding place. As a father, General Garza did not accept that his daughter would soon be finished off. After a while, James and his troops found Sandra. The pirate mafia then asked what Barney and Lee's purpose was when they came to Villena Island, but Sandra did not want to tell him. While Sandra were being interrogated, General Garza suddenly threw a bottle from the top of his palace. He said why Sandra decided to rebel, even though these things could hurt herself. Sandra also replied that all of that happened because General Garza was not firm as a leader. James, who did not want to hear this father and daughter drama, finally ordered his man named Payne to lock Sandra up, then tie her on the table, then torture her with water so that she would talk and leak Barney's plan. At the same time, Barney is confiding in the Tool about Sandra, who is still in danger. Barney feels a dilemma whether he should save Sandra or choose to keep quiet. Tool then told Barney that he regretted not saving a woman who asked him for help once, and since then he has always felt guilty for the rest of his life. After careful consideration, Barney decided to return to Villena, but he went there only to save Sandra, not to carry out a mission from the Mr. Church. At first, Lee and Yin Yang forbade Barney to go, but as a loyal team, they both finally came and were ready to help Barney. Without thinking, Yin Yang immediately got into Barney's car. Meanwhile, Lee will go wit his own way. On the way, Barney and Yin Yang talked to fill the void. But soon there were several cars that surrounded them suddenly. It turned out that the attacking mobster were Gunner and James' men. And here he really wanted revenge on Barney. Fortunately, Barney had extraordinary driving skills, while Yin Yang managed to keep up with the attacks of Gunner and his troops, even though his car was reckless. After driving for a long time, Barney and Yin Yang were able to stop Gunner's action. Then Yin Yang invited him to a duel. But this time, Yin Yang looked even more brutal than usual. He really didn't give his former partner any mercy. But unfortunately, Gunner managed to turn things around and almost slammed Yin Yang very hard. Fortunately, Barney immediately shot Gunner's shoulder until he fell. Barney deliberately shot the shoulder so that Gunner would not die instantly, because after all, he still considers him a friend. Seeing Barney's kindness, Gunner immediately leaked James' plan to him. Without lingering, Barney and Yin Yang rushed into the plane. Inside, Lee had invited Caesar and Tool to join him. Then the Expendables were ready for action and bragging rights again. Arriving in Villena, Barney and the Expendables immediately moved secretly while looking for Sandra's location. On the other hand, General Garza decided to fight James. He has also controlled all of his troops, thus making James nervous, and if Payne does not want to release Sandra, then General Garza will order all troops to kill James and all his men. Out of fear, James ordered his subordinates to release Sandra. What he didn't know that the Expendable was already in the underground tunnels of the palace and began to subvert his men silently. Apart from brutalizing in silence, they also planted bombs in all corners of the palace. They even planted them in the drug warehouse to make James lose a lot of money. At the same time, two mobsters were in Sandra's captivity, but one of them had a lot of lust. When he wanted to rape Sandra, Barney suddenly appeared and immediately finished them off very sadistically. Although he managed to release Sandra, unfortunately Barney was tackled by Payne and some other mobster. They then brought Sandra to General Garza and tortured her. But cleverly, Barney was able to catch Payne off guard, and when that happened, the Expendables suddenly appeared and immediately fought with the troops. In a short time, they managed to eliminate the troops. Unfortunately, hundreds of General Garza's soldiers also attacked, making Barney and the others a bit overwhelmed. Moreover, there were only 5 of them, with limited ammunition. Fortunately, Keyser had an automatic weapon that could easily slaughter the troops. His weapon even scared Payne into running away. On the other hand, General Garza had realized that what he had done all this time was a crime. To atone for his sins, he returned all of James' money, then expelled him from Valina. But because James didn't want to leave, General Garza threatened to kill him. However, Sandra doesn't want her father to kill again. Then the situation gets tense when Barney and his friends are surrounded by thousands of troops. Outside, General Garza then came out of the palace and asked them to release their weapons. But James ruthlessly shot General Garza until he fell. Meanwhile, his men began killing soldiers who were loyal to General Garza. Because of James, General Garza's army became uncontrollable. Because the situation was urgent, Barney was forced to detonate all the bombs in the palace. Apparently, this strategy succeeded in repelling the mobsters so Barney and his friends could slaughter them very easily. Moreover, some of the enemy troops were still unable to focus after the bomb explosion. And when the number of enemies decreased, Barney decided to pursue James in order to save Sandra. While Toll Road, he chose to wrestle with Payne. While Barney was chasing them, Lee and friends also made all the enemies, so that Barney was not blocked by anyone. Long story short, Toll Road managed to defeat Payne by throwing him into the flames. Meanwhile, Lee, Yin Yang, and Keyser had slaughtered all the mobster. After that, they all helped Barney to stop James. And again, Barney had a brilliant idea. He told Caesar to throw a bomb near the helicopter. Then Barney shot the bomb, until the explosion destroyed the helicopter to pieces. James, who could not escape anymore, finally threatened to kill Sandra, but Barney responded very politely. He is targeting James' weakness, which is nothing but provocation. And when James started to get angry, that was Barney's chance to kill him. After James was killed, Barney and his team immediately said goodbye to Sandra. Before leaving, Barney wants to give one of his accounts to Sandra, so that she can live comfortably. However, Sandra refused. This is because Barney has sacrificed too much for her. At the end of the story, the Expendables celebrate their success by partying. Apart from the team who just returned home, Gunner also joined the party, after recovering from yesterday's incident. Barney and the others decide to accept Gunner back. Moreover, he has also repented and admitted his mistakes. Then the Expendables' first movie ended. At the beginning of the Expendables 2, this elite squad is gearing up to go rogue. Still led by Barney Ross, they this time have a new member named Billy, the kid who is a former deadly sniper in the Special Forces. Today, they are back on a new mission to rescue hostages kidnapped by a ruthless terrorist group in Nepal. And the person they kidnapped is not just anyone, he is a Chinese millionaire named Dr. Zhou. Without thinking, the Expendables immediately stormed their headquarters with steel cars and all their weapons. As a result, the shootout was very brutal. Even though there were only 7 of them, this elite force was able to penetrate the opponent's defense wall guarded by hundreds of soldiers. Apart from Barney, all members were brutalized with totality, starting from Lee, Yin Yang, Gunner, Keyser, Toll Road, to Billy. They completely wiped out the terrorists' defense area. After breaking down the defense wall, the Expendables went inside their headquarters to find Dr. Zhou. Meanwhile, Barney and Lee are still outside to stop the enemy helicopter. Interestingly, Barney is able to destroy it by crashing a motorcycle into the helicopter. On the other hand, Yin Yang is fighting the terrorists with his kung fu skills. After finishing off all the terrorists, Barney and the others finally managed to find Dr. Zhou. But there is one more person who is being held hostage, and unexpectedly, the person is Trench, who is Barney's old friend. Trench always said that he was also hired to save Dr. Zhou. However, his reinforcements did not come. Therefore, Trench borrowed Caesar's weapon so that he could participate in the brutality. Then they immediately looked for a way out of the place. Unfortunately, the reinforcements of the terrorists had arrived and were ready to attack them. Luckily, Caesar cleverly shot the water tank refinery until it fell towards the terrorists. After that, the Expendables immediately left, while wiping out the enemy troops guarding the forest. Unfortunately, Barney and Lee fell and were surrounded by the enemy. But suddenly, It turned out that the person who saved them both was Billy. He is indeed a very extraordinary sniper, even though the distance is very far. After helping his two seniors, Billy then shot all the terrorists who were chasing his team in the river. With a precise shot, Billy also managed to escape all team members. He was also assisted by Barney and Lee, who had prepared the plane. However, the terrorist group called for more reinforcements. As a result, the Expendables immediately entered the plane. Then Barney gave Lee the command to fire rockets at the enemy. Long story short, the Expendables managed to escape the pursuit of their enemies, then flew to China to repatriate Dr. Zhao. But due to landing problems, Dr. Zhou inevitably had to jump using a parachute. To help him, he will be accompanied by Yin Yang, and coincidentally Yin Yang also intends to return to his hometown, as well as break a while from the Expendables. Upon returning to America, Barney invites his team to hang out at a nearby bar. While the others were drinking, Billy suddenly wanted to have a one-on-one talk with Barney. Billy said that he wanted to quit the Expendables. He wanted to go to Paris and live a normal life with his girlfriend because he had more than enough money. With a heavy heart, Barney gave him permission. After talking with Billy, Barney decided to go back to his workshop, but there was already Mr. Church waiting for him. In the first movie, Mr. Church was the one who gave the Expendables a mission. Unfortunately, the mission was not completed as agreed, even though Mr. Church had paid Barney and his team. Feeling cheated by Barney, Mr. Church threatened to throw him in the scariest prison, but he finally agreed to give the Expendables a second chance. This time Barney and his team have to carry out a new mission, which is to find a secret safe in an airplane wreckage. The safe holds an important document that Barney must retrieve. However, the safe is equipped with a password that changes, and if Barney fails to open it within 120 seconds, the plane will explode. Therefore, Mr. Church will send a hacker and safe expert named Maggie Chan, who comes with the Expendables. Barney initially rejected Mr. Church's proposal, but he had no other choice. Without wasting time, Barney met with Maggie to discuss this mission. Contrary to Barney's expectations, Maggie was not a crybaby. She can even ride a big bike and proves to be able to fight. And it seems that Maggie is not the type of person who will be a hassle or a burden to the team. The next day, the Expendables left for Albania. Here Billy decides to tag along. This meant it was his last mission. On the plane, Maggie asks about Billy's past when he was a member of the Special Forces. Billy happily told her everything, including the reason why he retired early and joined the Expendables. After a while, they finally arrived at their destination. And just like Mr. Church said, there was a stranded plane wreck. Without further ado, Barney immediately divided the tasks. Billy will stand guard outside, while the others help Maggie inside the plane. Barney and Caesar then held the safe door while Maggie tried to crack the code. However, the code suddenly changed automatically, so that the bomb in the safe box was activated. Inevitably, Maggie must be able to open it in a matter of seconds. Fortunately, she managed to do it well. After retrieving the hard drive inside the safe box, Maggie and the Expendables immediately returned to their plane. But strangely, Billy was not at the reconnaissance site, and it turned out that the young man had been caught by a group of mercenaries known as the Sangs. They were led by Villain. He was a soldier who had brutal in this world a fistfight. He then threatened to kill Billy if Barney and the others did not put down their weapons. With no other choice, the Expendables complied with Villain's want. Then Villain's men took away their weapons, including Barney's favorite knife. After that, Barney was also no choice to hand over the hard drive that had just been taken from the safe box. It turns out that from the beginning, the Sangs were eyeing the documents inside the hard drive. Villain then told the Expendables to stay down until they left safely. But unfortunately, Villain had stabbed Billy with Barney's knife, and unfortunately, Billy died because his heart stopped. Before he breathed his last, he had given a letter to Barney. The letter he wrote to his girlfriend, who was in France. In other words, he asked Barney to deliver it someday. Before burying Billy, Barney asked Maggie what the contents of the hard drive that was taken earlier were. Maggie said it contained documents about Russian mining that held 5 tons of plutonium. If Villain manages to find it, then they can sell the plutonium or make a very deadly bomb. Before all that happens, Barney and his team will track down and avenge Villain's actions against Billy. On the other hand, it turns out that Villain has long found the mining referred to by Maggie. He has even forced local residents to overwork and unpaid to dig in order to find the plutonium. And now he has a map of the location, so the search will be easier. Villain then ordered his right-hand man named Hector to speed up the excavation in 3 days. Meanwhile, Barney was contacted by Mr. Church asking about his hard drive, but because he failed, Mr. Church also sounded very disappointed, and for now Barney just wants revenge for Billy's death. Then Barney landed the plane in a small town, because the tracking device lost the signal. In this small town, Barney and Lee want to meet some people who might know about the location of the mining, while the others they will wait in the car with Maggie. Barney and Lee then entered a bar to find the person in question, but there was already a group of gangsters who suspected the arrival of the two of them. Inevitably, the gangsters were forced to tell after the two of them overthrew the gangsters. Maggie went inside and brought nail removal equipment because she intended to torture them so they would open their mouths. After getting information about the Sangs and the location of the mining, Barney tells Lee to get the weapons on the plane. Later that night, Barney and the team stayed in an empty building while waiting for Lee, who was carrying the weapons. When it was late at night, Maggie approached Barney, who looked upset while smoking a cigar, and it turns out he was reminiscing about the late Billy. As the leader, Barney feels very guilty because he can't take good care of him team. The next day, Barney and the team prepare to go to the mining site, but unfortunately, they were attacked by an armed group. It turns out they are members of the Sangs. Barney and the others were cornered, as their weapons were very limited. Lee, on the other hand, was still far from the location. But strangely, the terrorists suddenly fell by a mysterious attack. A moment later, the person who had just slaughtered the terrorists came out of hiding. He claimed to be Broker, a mercenary nicknamed the Lone Wolf for always working alone. And even more surprising, he is an old friend of Barney's who is considered dead. Barney then invites Broker to work together, but he refused because he wanted to keep working alone and maintain his name as a lone wolf. Even so, Broker still helped his old friend. He said that there was a village whose residents really hated Villain and the gang. If he can persuade them, then Barney will get enough help. Not long after, Lee finally arrived at the place with a car full of weapons. Without lingering, they immediately went to the village referred to by Broker. But unfortunately, they were greeted by attacks from local mothers. Luckily, they only gave a warning. Maggie then explained that the purpose of coming here was to finish off the Sangs. Hearing that, one of the women named Pilar invited them in. Pilar then told them that Villain and his troops had fooled the villagers. They offered jobs to men and promised them huge sums of money, but in fact, they only do manual labor without any pay. In addition, they also targeted children because they lacked workers. Therefore, Pilar hid the children from Villain's target. Pilar also asked Barney and his team to stay in the village for a while and help the residents secure the children. But unfortunately, Barney didn't have much time. On the other hand, Hector has found plutonium at the mining site. This means he needs more workers to make the retrieval process faster. So he sends troops to the village to retrieve the remaining men and children. But as they searched the church, a priest suddenly approached them. Unexpectedly, the priest was Lee in disguise. Without much ado, he immediately finished them off with his favorite knife. Not only Lee, Barney and the others also decided to help the villagers. Even Maggie also gave her fighting skills. At the same time, Villain tells Hector to bury the workers if all the plutonium has been taken. Meanwhile, the Expendables have managed to slaughter the members of the Sangs who were harassing the villagers. And now they are going to the mining site to save the workers from the psychopathic person like Villain. Without thinking, Lee immediately fired rockets at the enemy defense wall. Then Barney desperately crashes his plane into the outer wall of the mining, so he can get in quickly. Once inside, the Expendables went back to firing. Unfortunately, all the plutonium has been taken by Villain. Not only that, the terrorist had also planted a bomb there. As a result, Barney and the others along with the workers were trapped underground. After being trapped for several hours, Barney and his team have yet to find a way out. Unlike them, Gunnar had a brilliant idea. According to him, the rocks there can be made into explosives. Barney also believed him because he was a weapons expert. But unfortunately, the explosives made by Gunnar failed because the stones were damp. But not long after, suddenly the wall rumbled and began to crumble slowly. Apparently, the person who destroyed the wall was Trench. He deliberately came to get back at the Expendables. After the workers return to the arms of their respective families, Barney intends to find Villain and the Sangs. Here, Trench decides to help Barney again. In addition, he had also called the Mr. Church who wanted to join the brutal action together. Without further delay, they immediately boarded the helicopter, then confronted Villain and his army. Then as they approached, Barney and the others attacked brutally. Villain, who began to panic, finally ordered his men to move all the plutonium into the plane. Meanwhile, he and Hector would buy time by fighting the Expendables. The firefight was fierce. Here Barney and the others also get more help from the Broker. With his relaxed demeanor, Broker was able to finish off many of the Sangs without unleashing his true abilities. Barney then chased Villain and Hector, who seemed to want to escape. Meanwhile, Mr. Church, Trench, and the others were still struggling with the Sangs. On the other hand, Lee secretly followed Villain's men, and when they were caught off guard, he immediately brutalized them without mercy. After defeating the Sangs, Lee was challenged to a duel by Hector. As a fighter, of course, Lee was ready to duel with anyone. At the same time, Barney finally arrived at Villain's hideout. Initially, the two of them exchanged gunfire, but Villain ran out of bullets. Therefore, he invited Barney to duel with his bare hands. Barney agreed. They attacked each other. Here, Villain managed to make it difficult for Barney. He then took Barney's favorite knife and intended to finish him off with it. But even though he was overwhelmed, Barney was still able to get up again. And in the end, he was able to finish off Villain very brutally. Long story short, Barney and his team managed to control all the plutonium. Later this, plutonium will be handed over to the Mr. Church. Barney also did not forget to bring Villain's head as proof that the Sangs had died in his hands. Before returning to his base, the Mr. Church allowed Maggie to say goodbye to Barney first. Initially, she wanted to join the Expendables, but Barney was afraid that she would endanger him. After all, Maggie was the Mr. Church's trusted agent, so inevitably she had to go back with him. Besides Maggie, Broker also decided to join Mr. Church's agency, because he was getting tired of fighting alone. Before leaving, Mr. Church had prepared a plane for the Expendables as a gift for helping him all this time. At the end of the movie, Barney sent some money and also a letter to Billy's girlfriend. Meanwhile, the Expendables were full of smiles and happy because they had completed the mission, as well as avenging Billy, and the second movie was over. This third movie begins with a rescue mission carried out by the Expendable troops. Of course, this mission is led by the legendary Barney Ross. He is accompanied by Lee Christmas, Gunnar Jansen the shooter, and Toll Road the wrestling ace. They are now riding a helicopter and trying to stop a prison train. The train officials immediately respond with a deadly counterattack. They use more sophisticated weapons than the Expendable team. Luckily, they were knocked down by a power line. Once the situation was safe, Lee, Toll, and Gunnar immediately freed their target. He is Dr. Death, or Doc, a former member of the Expendable who will be locked up in the strictest prison. But instead of boarding the helicopter, Doc wants revenge first on the officers on the train. He also wants to kill all the guards in the prison. He then got into the driver's car and accelerated the train. Not only that, Doc also shot at the prison fortress blindly. When the train is won to crash into the building, he immediately climbs into Barney's helicopter. After destroying the prison, the Expendable goes to the airbase to return to headquarters. Here it is revealed that Doc was the first batch of Expendables. He is also one of the surviving founders. On the plane, Toll was curious about the Doc's past, because rumors said that he has killed many people and his victims exceed the plague. Doc also told Gunnar and Toll Road that he was once a medical expert before moving into the world of fighting. He then tells the story of the beginning of the Expendables. At that time, he and Barney founded this elite force with only 5 members. Then it increased to 22 members, and over time it ran out because they died in the mission. Every time someone died, Barney would hang their member tag name necklace in the airplane to commemorate the services of those who had passed away. After telling the story, Doc borrowed Gunner's knife to shave his beard. Lee, on the other hand, is a little unhappy with Doc's crazy behavior, but Barney defends him by saying that Doc had a hard time during his 8 years in prison. While the two of them were talking, Doc suddenly appeared from behind. He told Barney that he couldn't wait to go home and party as much as he could. But before going home, Barney wants to get Doc into action. This time the mission is to stop the trading of bombs by Victor Minus, a very famous arms mafia. But Doc doesn't want to go if his favorite knives aren't there. It is known that Doc is the legendary knife expert that the Expendable once had, and unexpectedly Barney has brought all his belongings. After Barney gave the knives, he told Doc to thank Lee, Gunner, and also Toll for saving him. Long story short, Barney and the others finally arrived at their destination, Somalia. Here, they were immediately greeted by Hail Caesar, who was also a member of the Expendable. He was waiting on the boat. Caesar has also prepared all the weapons to launch the mission. They then entered a warehouse and split up to eliminate the guards secretly. Elsewhere, Gunner and Caesar monitored from the boat. Gunner also shoots at the guards watching Barney from the roof of the building. Afterward, it was Doc's turn to show his brutality. With just a knife, Doc finished off the guards very quickly. Then hijacked the trailer transport machine so that Barney and the others could get into it. Then not long after, their target arrived at the location. And unexpectedly, the person who will sell the bomb is Conrad Stonebanks. He is an old friend of Barney who has now changed his name to Victor for business. Conrad also worked as a member of the Expendable before finally becoming evil. Suddenly, Barney was immediately become brutally. He and his team attacked Conrad and the others, as well as the weapons and bombs that were to be smuggled in. After that, the Expendables immediately left the location. But it turns out that the enemy has a very large army, so inevitably Barney and the others must fight them. Luckily, Barney and the others were able to escape their attacks. On the other hand, Caesar and Gunner were still on the boat. They both also joined the team using a very epic way. When the team was complete, Barney gave orders to finish off the mobsters who were still chasing. Without them realizing it, Conrad was lurking from above. He was also one to shoot Barney in the head, but somehow he shot Caesar's legs and butt instead. Afterward, Conrad launched a rocket bomb at them. As a result of the explosion, Caesar's injuries worsened and left him dying. Fortunately, they have a doc who can prevent Caesar's death. The next day, the Expendable takes Caesar to the hospital to receive better treatment. Here Barney is also visited by Trench, his old friend. Trench is saddened by what happened to Caesar. He then asked who the culprit was. Barney replies that all of this is Conrad's action. Hearing that, Trench was shocked, because he thought Conrad had been killed by Barney. Trench then suggested that Barney just retire like him, but Barney still wants to be brutalized to the end. Barney was then discharged from the hospital, but he was awaited by the CIA's Chief of Operations, Max Drummer. He has replaced the position of the Mr. Church. Here Max looks disappointed with Barney, who failed to catch Conrad. He will give one more chance, and if it fails again, then there will be no mercy for him. Max then told Barney to find a replacement for Caesar, so as not to lack of members. At the same time, Conrad is at an art gallery in Russia. He seems to be buying a strange painting that he thinks is not good at all. Barney, on the other hand, gathers all the remaining members, then invited them to drink at a bar. While drinking, Barney thanks his team for their hard work, but he wants to disband the Expendables. He didn't want any more members to die or get seriously injured like Caesar. Lee, who didn't accept it, immediately got angry with Barney. What's more, they haven't gotten revenge on Conrad for making Caesar right now. Then Lee just left. A few days later, Barney went to Nevada to see his old friend Bonaparte. He asked for help to form a new team. The first person recruited was Thorne. He was a reliable hacker who had hacked into a city's system. In addition, he is also a professional rock climber. Bonaparte then took Barney to New York to recruit the next member, Luna. She was a discotheque security guard who was very good at fisticuffs. Bonaparte then drove Barney to Arizona to meet another candidate named Philip Silva. The man looks like a ninja, but after his face cover is removed, it turns out that he is Galgo who faked his identity. For information, Galgo is a former Special Forces officer who really wants to work with Barney. Suddenly, Bonaparte took Barney away, because Galgo was too old for this mission, especially when compared to Thorn and Luna. Bonaparte also replaced him with someone else, namely Marlito. He is a weapons expert as well as an expert shooter. And for the last member, Bonaparte introduces Barney to the figure of John Smealy. He is a former Special Forces who is now a street fighter. But unfortunately he lost when Barney watched his match. He is also known as an unruly person. Bonaparte wanted to introduce another candidate, but Barney still wanted to recruit John. According to him, John has potential that can be developed. Although John hesitated, in the end he was no choice to accept Barney's offer because he needed the money. In the evening, Barney prepares to return to headquarters. When he wanted to leave, Max was suddenly in his car. He then gave information about the location of Conrad, who was in the city of Bucharest. Barney had to arrest him immediately, but he was forbidden to kill him because the CIA wanted to hand over Conrad to the military court at Den Haag in the Netherlands. Before leaving, Max warned Barney not to fail in this mission. Without wasting any more time, Barney immediately gathered his new team in the morning. But he was visited again by his old team, namely Lee Gunner, Doc, and Toll Road. They still don't accept being disbanded. Moreover, this is Barney working with a new team without telling them. Doc then called this team an amateur team. Suddenly, this caused tension between them. Lee finally invited the others to just leave. But before leaving, Lee showed his knife-throwing skills to the young men. Not long after, Barney and his new team departed using the expendable plane, but the pilot this time is Trench. On the plane, John asked Barney why he wanted to catch Conrad so badly. Barney immediately gave a document for Max, which contained all the evidence of Conrad's crimes. When John opened the document, he saw all the evil things the Mafia had done, but he also saw the Expendables tattoo on Conrad's hand. At the same time, Lee and the others were upset at home. They didn't know what to do, because since the team was disbanded, they were officially unemployed. The next day, Barney and the others arrived in Bucharest. They immediately began monitoring the movements of Conrad and those closest to him. After scouting the opponent's security, Barney and the gang returned to headquarters to discuss their strategy. Initially, Barney suggested that the team immediately raid the location of the arms trade. However, no one agreed with the plan, as it was too risky. On the other hand, Thorn proposed another plan, which was to hack into the hotel system that Conrad was staying in. This way, they could infiltrate and catch Conrad. Without much thought, everyone agreed with Thorn's plan. When it was late, Barney and his team began to move. Barney and Luna will enter through the waterways that are directly connected to Conrad's hotel. Meanwhile, Thorn would be in charge of controlling the surveillance drones to report on the situation outside. As for John and Marlito, they are tasked with entering through the access door that Thorn has hacked. Not long after, the buyer of Conrad's weapons suddenly appeared, even though it was not yet time. He is Goran Vada, a local mobster who is interested in the arms business. This also made Barney and his friends speed up the action. They begin to take out the guards and aim straight for Conrad and the others. Afterward, Thorn turned off the hotel's electricity, and a shootout ensues. Thorn had also closed access to all exits, so Conrad had nowhere to go. Then it was Luna's turn to act. She immediately beat Conrad and his men. Long story short, Barney and the others kidnapped Conrad and kept him in the car. Barney beat Conrad mercilessly. Here Conrad continues to tweeting so much so that make Barney gets even more emotional and becomes careless. And when Barney and his team began to let their guard down, suddenly Conrad's men were already scouting with a helicopter. It turned out that Conrad had brought a GPS tracker, so his team could catch up. As a result, their car was shot until it rolled over. Conrad's men also fired rockets at Barney and made him bounce into the river. But because he was carried away by the current flow river, Conrad could not find Barney. Therefore, he decided to kidnap Thorn and the others, and will make them as a bait. The next morning, Conrad's men found Barney, who was stranded on the riverbank. But Barney didn't stay silent. He was immediately brutal, and it only took 3 seconds. He was able to finish off all the mobsters. After being brutalized, Barney returned to the airbase to meet Trench. Not long after, a video was sent from Conrad, which showed Barney's team being held kidnapped and tortured by him. He threatened to kill them if Barney didn't show up within the next 48 hours. Barney decided to save his men. Trench tried to persuade Barney to call Lee and friends, but he didn't want to because they were retired. And not long after, Galgo appeared. He convinced Barney to take him on this mission. Although hesitant, Barney finally accepted Galgo because of his persistence in arguing. Even when Barney was busy preparing the plane, all Galgo did was tell him about his past. But what can it be? Even it irritated him. Barney does need his help. Long story short, the plane was ready to fly. But when he wanted to take off, his plane was suddenly intercepted by Lee and his friends. They also want to participate in this mission. Inevitably, Barney let them on the plane. Barney was contacted again by Max, who provided information about the current location of Conrad and his troops. Max also reminded him that Conrad could not be killed. He must be caught alive. Max, on the other hand, chose to go directly to the field. Despite his age, he still wanted to be brutal. Not alone, Max is accompanied by Trench and Yin Yang. He is also a member of the Expendable who has appeared in the previous 2 movies. At the same time, Barney's team had arrived in the forest near Conrad's hideout. While walking, Barney asked Galgo why he retired from the military and was abandoned by his troops. It turns out that Galgo was not abandoned because he was stupid. Instead, his friends died on the battlefield, and he was the only one still alive. They then monitored Conrad's hideout. But strangely, there were no guards there. Barney and the others rushed in and saved the young team. But what he didn't realize was that the building had explosives in every corner, and they only had 45 seconds to get out. Thorn did not remain silent. He immediately took Gunner's signal antidote to block the network on Conrad's explosives. Thanks to his hacking skills, Thorn managed to disable all the bombs in the building. But the problem doesn't stop there. The bombs could still explode if Gunner's device went off. On the other hand, Conrad has also sent thousands of troops from Armenia to surround Barney and the others. Not only are they surrounded, they also have internal conflicts between the senior and junior teams. Barney also tried to be the mediator. He motivates his members that if they unite, they will definitely win this battle, even with only 10 people. He was confident that he could win if he worked as a team. After everyone calmed down, Barney immediately handed out weapons and explained the exit strategy, which was basically to go forward and never back down. These 10 elite troops fought without any fear. Even with the limited weapons, they were able to survive the attacks of steel tanks and countless enemy invasions. Luckily, Max arrived just in time. He, along with Trench and Yin Yang, assisted with airstrikes. Because of Max's help, Barney's team became more free to attack, and this also made Conrad angry. In another corner, Luna was trapping with the soldiers. Meanwhile, Galgo was busy dodging long-range attacks, and miraculously he was not injured at all. Galgo then helped Luna to cut down the enemy soldiers with just one lunge. Meanwhile, Max was targeting the enemy helicopter. Upon approaching the target, Yin Yang immediately opened fire. At the same time, Gunner and Tolreed hijacked an enemy steel tank to counterattack. While the war was in full swing, Conrad sent out his men again, this time led by a big man, but in just a short time, Lee and his friends were able to take him and his henchmen down. Unfortunately, Conrad's reinforcements kept coming, as if this was a world battlefield, even though what they were fighting was only 13 people. Therefore, Barney immediately ordered all of his members to climb to the roof so they could get into Max's helicopter. On the other hand, Conrad began to get frustrated because his troops were unable to fight Barney and the gang. He finally decided to jump into the field. When the others had reached the roof, Barney was suddenly shot by Conrad. Then Conrad invited him to duel with his bare hands. As a living legend, of course, Barney accepted his challenge. Barney, who was tired, got back up again and managed to defeat Conrad. But unfortunately, the bomb in the building exploded because the signal antidote was off. Without thinking, Barney immediately ran to the helicopter before the building collapsed. After the battle, Barney throws a party at a bar. Here, Keezer is seen rejoining the party. Max also attends the party. He is not disappointed with Barney, despite failing to bring Conrad alive. Max is actually happy to be working with him. Meanwhile, Galgo is now officially a new The Expendable member. Everyone is happy, including Trench, who returns from retirement, and will continue to be brutal with Yin Yang. And so, the third movie ended. At the beginning of the latest The Expendables movie, it begins with a bombastic attack on a Libyan technology warehouse, which is guarded by a Libyan general named Fezin. Meanwhile, this attack is carried out by a group of terrorists who want to steal a nuclear bomb there. Interestingly, this brutal group is led by a man named Swarda Ramat. He is a former British Special Forces who has absolutely no manners and is known as one of the most brutal soldiers in England. Then comes a legendary figure who is none other than Barney Ross. He is seen visiting Lee Christmas' house. But Lee is apparently having an argument with his girlfriend Gina, who also happens to be a member of the new generation of the Expendables. No wonder he dared to argue with Lee, who is known as the most brutal person. After his argument with Gina, Lee chooses to join Barney, who invites him to drink at the bar. However, Barney has another purpose, where he wants to take his favorite ring from a thug named Jumbo back. As it turns out, Barney got drunk and got involved in gambling, then lost a bet to Jumbo, and because he wasn't feeling well, Barney asked Lee for help to get his ring back. Not long after, Jumbo walked into the bar. However, it actually made Lee surprised, because the person named Jumbo turned out to be a midget, not in accordance with his nickname. No wasting time, Lee engaged the Jumbo and his men in a fistfight, and the winner would be the owner of Barney's ring. Even though it's one against many, Lee manages to make them look like losers, and thanks to his brutality, Barney's ring was back in the right hands. At the same time, Ramat Swardo was still brutalizing Libya. Although they had slaughtered some of the general's troops, there were still some guards still alive. Ramat didn't care how many guards there were, because he would definitely finish them all off. At the same time, the Expendables were gathering for a new mission. In addition to the main members, they also have two additional members. The first is a former Special Forces officer called Easy Day, while the other is Galan. He is the son of Galgo, who has retired from the Expendables. Just like his father, Galen also has a personality that is a lot of talk. Not long after, they had a guest who would give them a mission. He is a CIA officer named Marsh. Here, Marsh asks them to arrest Ramat Swardo, who is now in Libya. In addition, they also have to take the bomb detonator, so that there is no greater chaos. That said, Ramat Swardo is working with a mysterious figure named Ocelot. This legendary figure is Barney's archenemy, but he himself never saw his form. Even some people thought it was a ghost. But clearly, Ocelot is a very strong and clever person. And without further ado, the Expendables flew straight to Libya. But because the journey was quite long, they were quite bored on the plane. In addition, Galen also made them a little annoyed, because he talked too much. On the other hand, Ramat was torturing General Fezin and had even killed his wife. And if the general doesn't hand over the bomb detonator, then Ramat will kill his son. No have choice, General Fezin finally told him the bomb room and the detonator, as well as the security code to open it. After getting that, Ramat killed the general and his young son. A short time later, the Expendables arrived in Libya. But strangely, their plane was immediately attacked, even though the distance from the attack site was still quite far. As a result, Barney dropped the entire team to fight Ramat Swardo's henchmen, while he would remain on the plane and attack from the air. When he was below, Gunner immediately shot Ramat from a distance, but all his shots missed. Therefore, it was inevitable that they all had to attack them recklessly. In a short time, the Expendables were able to eliminate most of Rahmat's men, but they still had difficulty catching the mobster because of his bulletproof car. In addition, Rahmat's reinforcements continued to arrive, so the Expendables were forced to shoot again. In the middle of the shootout, Barney's plane was suddenly shot by Rahmat's automatic weapon. Although his plane almost crashed, Barney still told Lee to focus on the mission. But as a friend, Lee couldn't possibly let Barney's plane crash. As a result, he turned and crashed his car into the automatic weapon. But unfortunately, Rahmat Suardo shot Barney's plane again until the engine was completely damaged, and unfortunately, the plane crashed and killed Barney. Even his body was burnt and charred, leaving only his bones and his favorite ring. The next day, the Expendables remembered Barney Ross, who they already considered like their own brother. This moment also made Lee very sad, especially since he was Barney's closest friend, and while mourning, Gina suddenly sat in front of him to express her condolences. But not long after, Marsh came and ruined the atmosphere. Marsh said that Lee had been fired from the Expendables because he was the one who guilty of the failure of yesterday's mission. Even though Barney had given orders to focus on the mission, Lee tried to save him, and his efforts failed. According to Marsh, Lee is not only guilty, but also has the potential to take revenge on Rahmat Suardo, which will definitely ruin the mission again. And in return, Gina would also be promoted to captain in the Expendables, because she has extraordinary tactical skills. Like it or not, Lee had to leave the place. After being fired from the Expendables, Lee had to be unemployed. Not wanting to live as the scum of the earth, Lee finally applied for a job as a personal bodyguard. It didn't take long before he was accepted as a bodyguard for the fatty celebrity, whose only doing was to party and get drunk. At first, Lee felt normal, but over time the social media artist became more annoying and often demeaned women. Seeing that, Lee beat him up while he was live streaming. As a result, Lee was fired and had to be unemployed again. However, it was actually good for him, because he could focus on avenging Barney. Later that night, Lee sneaks into Jana's house to steal the secret documents in her safe box, but unfortunately, he is caught red-handed by Gina. Here, Gina says that the document is an old document that can finally be opened after Barney died. In addition, this document could also be a clue to Ocelot's true identity. Hearing that, Lee asked Gina to invite him to join the mission, because he really wanted to finish off Rahmat Suardo and find Ocelot. But Gina did not want to involve Lee, who was still full of resentment. As a result, the two of them fought. Even though they fought, they ended up making love until dawn. After playing, Lee gave Gina a knife to carry during the mission. Lee was well aware that he couldn't go, so he hoped the knife would represent him. But apparently, the knife had been planted by GPS, because Lee intended to catch up with Gina and her team. On the other hand, the Expendables are already on the plane and will fly to the CIA branch office in South Asia. But in this mission, they have a new member brought by Gina. He is a Vietnamese combat expert named Lash. In addition, there is one member who has changed completely since Barney's death, and that member is Galen. He usually talks a lot on the plane, but this time he looked sad and didn't speak at all, like an introvert. Without wasting time, Marsh and his assistant, Rusho, immediately explained their new mission. This mission would take place in the middle of the ocean, as Rahmat Suardo and the others planned to detonate a nuclear bomb near Russia. The goal is because Ocelot wants to create a third world war, and in order for that not to happen, the Expendables must immediately immobilize Rahmat and take over the detonator. Marsh and Rusho have also prepared a backup plan, where they will negotiate with Rahmat. Marsh believes that Rahmat will ask him to release Ocelot's men, named Lion Bay, who is currently locked up in a prison in the middle of nowhere owned by the CIA. In carrying out this mission, the Expendables will also be assisted by Marsh, who will go down the battlefield with them. Once everything was clear, they all start in action. At the same time, Lee was in Thailand. In this place, he intends to find someone named Decca. It is said that Decca is a deadly fighter and is feared by all opponents. In addition, he is also an old friend of Barney and was once a member of the Expendables. Unfortunately, no one knew about Decca, and it was even rumored that he had passed away a long time ago. As a result, Lee decided to look elsewhere using a ship. Uniquely, the ship has the Expendables logo. And when Lee wanted to leave, he was suddenly stopped by a sweeper who turned out to be a Muay Thai expert. But then he was surprised when he saw Barney's ring on Lee's finger. What's more, after he found out that Barney had died killed by Ramat Swardo. He finally confessed that he was Decca and decided to help Lee in avenging Barney's death. The two of them then set sail following the GPS directions. On the voyage, Decca told Lee that he retired because he didn't want to kill people anymore. He felt that every time he killed, his heart became uneasy and feel guilty. In order to find peace, Decca had to quit fighting altogether. On the other hand, the Expendables had reached the ship that Ramat had hijacked, but strangely, there were no signs of life there. Janet gave orders to search every corner of the ship, but they still didn't find anyone. Then when they were caught off guard, they were suddenly attacked. As a result, they could not move because they were surrounded from all directions. Ramat's men then disarmed the Expendables and locked them up on the ship. While locked up, the Expendables suspected each other. They suspected that someone had leaked the ambush plan. While they were arguing, Ramat Swardo's right-hand man Bach suddenly entered the room. He then hit Marsh and brought him before Ramat. Here, Ramat forced Marsh to release Liang Bei from custody. He had also contacted Rusho so that the process could be expedited. Because if not, Ramat will finish off all the Expendables, including Marsh. On the other hand, Lee and Decca had arrived near the ship, but unfortunately, Decca did not board and chose to go home. Lee could understand the decision. Finally, he got on the ship by himself. He then sneaked in secretly. But unfortunately, he was caught by one of the mobsters. As a result, Lee was brutalized suddenly. Lee then went inside very quietly, while tracking the location of his colleagues. Because the security was so tight, he had no choice but to brutalize silently. Amazingly, he was able to slaughter many guards without making any noise. After taking out the guards, Lee was a little confused because the Expendables' weapons were in the warehouse. He finally realized that his friends were being held as hostage. In addition, Ramat received a report on Lee's appearance. As a result, Ramat's men immediately ordered their troops to hunt down and finish Lee. Although only alone, these mobsters were no match in handle for Lee. Then cleverly, Lee stole one of the armed motorcycles there, then went on a wild ride in the boat. He became even harder to beat. But unfortunately, Ramat's men were not finished up, and they managed to corner Lee. When the situation was at a dead end, Lee suddenly got help from Decca. This man decided to be brutal in order to revenge Barney's life. Lee was very surprised by Decca's fighting skills. He really only relied on knives and self-defense, even though all his opponents used firearms. At the same time, the Expendables were thinking of a way to get out of there. After an analyst, they found a small hole covered with a metal door. Easy then said that the door had to be exposed to water because the system was made that way. As a result, Toll Road, who had already had enough, immediately peed on the door in question, and sure enough the door opened when it was wet. When they got out, Lee and Decca just entered the room. Unfortunately, Jana and her friends were again confronted by Ramat's men. Meanwhile, they have not taken their respective weapons. But suddenly Ramat's men were shot. After that, Lee introduced Decca to all his friends. Then they gathered to plan a strategy. What's more, because the nuclear bomb has started to activate, and they only have 27 minutes to brutalize. First, the Expendables created a distraction with a radio that was connected to the homemade bomb. Once the bomb went off, Lee and company showed up and took out the enemy with their own style and weapons. All the team members were on fire, making for an exciting and bloody brawl. But unfortunately, Toll Road was stabbed by Bach from behind, and Decca, who saw that, finally decided to duel with Bach. Decca was not alone. He was assisted by Lash. Bach was caught off guard and ended up dying a horrible death. And at the same time, Lee invited Ramat to fight one-on-one. Casually, Ramat took out his mainstay weapon in the form of a pair of tonfas, while Lee remained loyal to his favorite knife. The fight was brutal. Lee was quite overwhelmed when facing Ramat, because Ramat mastered Silat moves that were difficult to guess. But thanks to his ingenuity, Lee was able to see an opening and managed to slash Rahmat with an axe. Lee then stepped on the axe so that Rahmat was in pain. All that he did was to avenge Barney. He then asked Rahmat about the bomb detonator, but it turned out that the detonator was in Ocelot's hands. Not long after, the CIA came to bring Lion Bay to be exchanged for Marsh, but suddenly Lion Bay is terrified when he sees him, and here it is revealed that Marsh is Ocelot. He then shot Lion Bay because he had all the evidence of his crimes so far. All this time they thought they were friends, but they turned out to be opponents. Seeing that, Lee and his friends were furious. All this time, it turned out that they had always carried out Ocelot's plans. Before finishing off Marsh, Lee killed Rahmat first. Then he shot Marsh's helicopter with a rocket gun, so he couldn't escape and had no choice but to turn off the bomb. Unfortunately, Marsh threw away the bomb detonator. In addition, he also mobilized all his troops to finish off the expendables. Since they were low on ammunition and the toll road was getting worse, Decca came up with the idea of escaping from there using his ship. To divert attention, Gunner made several explosions so that his troops could get down to Decca's ship safely. When everyone had disembarked, Lee cut off the rope. He chose to sacrifice himself because the bomb will to explode. Lee told his team to get as far away as possible, while he would stop the large ship so that the bomb explosion would not endanger humanity. Marsh did not remain silent. He immediately mobilized his troops to run his ship and kill Lee. When Lee had given up, suddenly there was a mysterious attack that killed all of Marsh's men. Marsh, who was left alone, finally invited Lee to duel one-on-one. But when the struggle was to begin, Marsh was suddenly shot. Unexpectedly, the person who shot Marsh was Barney. Somehow, Barney is still alive and well. Barney then invited Lee to board the helicopter. Then he sank the ship so that the bomb exploded under the sea. At the end of the movie, the Expendables are back together, at the regular bar, celebrating the arrival of Barney, who has risen from the grave. Here Barney tells them that he had jumped before his plane exploded, and that the corpse on the plane was Jumbo's. In other words, Barney had a plan to fake his death. With that happy ending, the movie ended.